Hi guys, welcome to the first Whiskey Web Wednesday of 2022. So happy new year to you and happy new yeast. So today I'm going to talk about yeast, the great forgotten champion of all alcohol and whiskey. So let's get to know yeast a little better during this video. Now, yeast is a microorganism. It's eukaryotic in terms of it's a single-celled microorganism with a nucleus and organelles. So it's a particular kind of fungus. It's a fungi, but it's particularly useful in alcohol due to its properties and fermentation. So let's have a look at a yeast cell. This is a little drawing of a yeast cell here. You can see here we've got the cell wall, there's a nucleus, and there's the vacuole. That's the thing that you're most likely to see under the microscope, the largest part. It's kind of like a store for ions. There's other things in there like mitochondria and such like, but yeah, that's the main two. And what happens is yeast is very good at multiplying itself. It wants to take over whatever environment it's in. So what you have is this budding effect. And when there's appropriate nutrients around, the yeast will just multiply itself. And you get this bud. And this here is called the mother, and that's called the daughter. So a nice family connection there for your yeast. And when this little bud comes out, the nucleus will go in there and it will divide. And then the vacuole will appear on both sides as well. You have this cell division. So this is the most common way of yeast multiplying. Sometimes you have fission as well, but that's a lot rarer. Mostly it's budding is the process. And this happens very quickly, and if you think about it, 40 million cells in a milliliter of liquid. That's the kind of density of yeast we're talking about here. So multiplies very quickly, and yeah, very active once it gets going. And what the yeast needs is wort. So in the distilling process we start with wort, which is kind of like a sugary barley liquid from the mash tun. And within that you've got sugars, primarily maltose. That's the main fermentable sugar that the yeast likes to feed on. And there's also amino acids and vitamins, which are like yeast nutrients. And this is what keeps the yeast healthy and vital. So the yeast cell here absorbs all these things and turns them into energy, and it uses that energy to create heat. So that's something you notice during a whiskey fermentation. It starts off at maybe 18 or 20 degrees centigrade, and then during the course of the fermentation it heats up to around maybe 30-35 degrees centigrade sometimes, depending on how active the yeast is. You get new growth, so that's the budding process here. Some of the energy is used for that. But then you get these kind of waste products, but these waste products are very useful. Alcohol is the primary one we're interested in. You also get CO2, that's carbon dioxide. If you ever put your head over a fermenter, you get the strong kickback from all the CO2 coming off the fermenter. Also flavour. The kind of flavours you get from yeast are fruity, floral, cut grass kind of notes. So that's some of the flavour profile in whiskey that comes directly from the yeast. And then finally more yeast. So it multiplies. After say 48 hours, most of the fermentation is done in a typical Scotch distillery. Most of the fermentable sugars are converted into alcohol, and then the yeast activity will really die down, and you see that in the bubbles in the fermentation. Very active for the first day, second day, and then after that it just kind of dies down into a more settled liquid. And one of the funny things that yeast does actually is once it's had enough, it just kind of eats itself. So it's got this a trigger in it that just says, right, okay, I've had enough, I think it's called autolysis or autolyse. It just decides, no, I'm just going to eat myself. There's nothing else for me to eat, so I might as well just eat myself. So that's quite a way to go in the world of yeast, so be grateful you don't have to do that. So that's some of the things that apply to yeast. Now, in the Scotch industry, after about 1970s, a lot of distillers switched from, say, brewer's yeast, which is Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and they all went to the M strain of distiller's yeast. This is a very hardy, robust yeast. It's a tough cookie. It can handle high temperatures. It can handle a lot of sugar. It works very quickly, so it's perfect for distillers' purposes. But what we've seen in the last couple of years is a lot more experimentation coming along with yeast. Two of the main proponents are Glenmorangie with Glenmorangie Alta. They released their first ever proprietary strain of yeast whiskey. So they got yeast from their Cadboll estate, which they took from the barley, and then Dr. Bill Lumsden used this and cultured it until it was a pure strain, and then used it to make this particular whiskey, which is very nice. The other one is Deval Gandhi. He is the master whiskey maker at Lakes Distillery. I actually met him in Vancouver. He did a blending course, which was fantastic, and he talked about using different strains of yeast. So he uses Pinnacle, Fermentus, Lallemand, these different companies that produce yeast, and then he alternates his fermenters. So he'll pitch different ones each day, and that creates complexity in flavour from 3 different types of yeast. So yeah, 2 distilleries to look out for there in terms of the new yeast horizon, in terms of yeast innovation. And it's also something we're doing at Shelter Point. We've done spontaneous fermentations where we've taken buckets of wort out around the farm and we've put them in different locations, and we've collected natural yeast. It's called a spontaneous fermentation, and hopefully one day we'll be able to make a whiskey from that. So I hope you've enjoyed that little tour of yeast in the whiskey industry. It's an exciting area, one that's going to develop, and one that I think we'll see more of in 2022, so I thought that would be a good place to start. Any questions, just put them in the comments below. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video. Thank you.